Good morning, parishioners and guests. I am very pleased and honored to be able to introduce Donna Weng Friedman, an acclaimed musician and pianist. Donna trained and was studied at Princeton University and received her Master's of Music at Juilliard. She is on the Faculty of Music at the Mannes School of Music at the New School. And she's also appeared as a soloist with the Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Shanghai Symphony Orchestras. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, given what we've seen in the news, Donna is also a victim of anti-Asian harassment and bigotry during this pandemic. She is here today to discuss that experience, but more importantly, she's here today to discuss her uplifting journey from that hate-filled experience to today. So please join me in giving a nice applause for Donna Weng Friedman. And John Heyer is going to lead to the discussion with Donna. John?
Thank you, Michael. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much. I want to first tell you how moved I am to be here with all of you today. And I hope you will excuse me for being very emotional, because this is my first in-person appearance since March 2nd, 2020. And being here, seeing all of you in this glorious church, experiencing this extraordinary service, I am so grateful to all of you for inviting me. I want to thank especially my dear friend Dorothy Pacella for introducing me to this incredible community. And I am so happy to be here. And a shout out to your incredible music director and that glorious voice of an angel. The music touched me so much. So bravo to them.
So the parish has put together a couple of questions. There are 6 questions, and we were just going to have a frank conversation for no more than 10 minutes, understanding that, you know, time is of the essence, obviously, in this world today. But we thought this was meaningful enough to take a moment out. And Donna, is it warm enough in the church for you?
Yes.
Because we made sure. Okay, very good.
Absolutely.
So, Mike alluded to your personal journey from being victimized as an Asian American during the pandemic, contracting COVID, and putting together an album of beautiful classical music that yourself and other Asian American and Pacific Islander musicians have collaborated on, called Heritage in Harmony, Silver Lining. Can you speak about that journey and the vital role that music has played during it?
Yes. Well, you know, this started for me early last March, and I think that was when all the news and the rumors were spreading about this deadly virus that originated from Wuhan, China. And it was, I remember very clearly, it was a beautiful sunny day. I was walking my dog, 1 p.m. in Central Park, not far from where I live, when suddenly, from out of nowhere, this very large, angry man comes barreling towards me, and he starts screaming in my face the most horrible anti-Asian slurs, insults. And he blamed me for the virus. And he threatened me by saying, "Go back to China or get what you deserve." He was standing so close to me, and you know, I'm very, very small, and he was huge, and I thought at any moment he might hurt me, shove me, push me, strike me. But thankfully, people were walking by at that moment, and as a coward would, he fled into the park. And I took my doggie and I ran home. And I did not leave my apartment for 8 months after that. That was before sheltering in home started, before the quarantining. And my husband, who is here with me today, was very concerned. He said, you know, you have to go out. You have to get sunlight, breathe fresh air. So he bought me pepper spray. I couldn't do that. I couldn't see myself going outside with pepper spray because I'm small. I could be overpowered. It could go wrong. All these negative thoughts flooded my mind. And then he offered, he said, why don't we just walk out together? And a very rational mind would say yes. But I wasn't feeling rational because I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be the Asian that would cause this virus to spread. So I stayed home. But as I always do, I turned to my music. And I immersed myself in the music composed and performed by underrepresented musicians. Classical musicians of Asian descent, African American composers, female composers, music that is really not heard enough. Most people would never know, but is incredible. And I found the first piece that spoke to me in a way that nothing had spoken to me before was a piece called Space Between the Fish and the Moon by Cambodian American composer Chinnery Ong. And what this piece did for me, it brought me back to a time during my childhood when my parents would take me to the Buddhist temple on Sundays. And in our ceremonies there, in the services, the monks would sing very much the way this beautiful service had the music. And there'd be bells played intermittently, chants, gongs, and I felt peaceful, but more importantly, I felt safe. And that piece, I believe, was the beginning of my journey to healing. And throughout the rest of the year, I would collect pieces like that, music that spoke to me and that I felt helped me get back on track. And I started performing again virtually, doing talks and programming virtually. And I started slowly but surely opening up about the incident that happened, which I didn't think was significant enough because there were so many more attacks, brutal attacks against our community. I felt, I never reported mine, I didn't think it was important, but I was actually wrong because nothing that is so hateful, is unimportant. And I felt that by starting to tell my story that maybe someone else who had that experience might feel more empowered. So the year went by, and yes, my entire family got sick with COVID in December. But thankfully, we all recovered. None of us were hospitalized, and I was so grateful. And I decided to record my music. It was more of a personal project for myself so that I would always know what we went through in 2020 and we got through. But then the hate crimes continued, and at one point, I believe that it rose 164% greater than the previous year, which is astonishing and devastating. And I wanted to do something in my own small way to support my Asian American community. So I decided to release the album on Spotify and Amazon and dedicate this and donate all the proceeds through a very generous and resourceful organization called the Korean American Community Foundation that fights against racism. And I am not Korean, and they do not only just support the Korean community, they support all communities, and that's what really this is all about. So I felt that in my own small way, I could help people who may want to support the Asian American community but may not know how. So by listening to each track on my album, they would not only be introduced to glorious music that they would never have heard of before, but should, but they would also be making a small but, I think, impactful contribution to our community.
And you touched on it a little bit. Many moons ago, I ran for political office. And putting yourself out there in the public, which you didn't, you were just walking in the street. I was referred to as mafia. I was referred to as olive oil soaked, just because of my Italian heritage and identity. What impact has this hateful experience had on you and the way that you view your Asian American heritage as an individual and your community? What has it meant for your identity now?
It's very funny because ironically that incident that happened started me really thinking about who I was, my roots, and my identity as being Asian. And during that period of time, being at home, I thought a lot about my parents and their stories, and the stories that they shared with me when I was growing up as a kid. And every time they told me this story, I would roll my eyes and say, oh gosh, there they go again. But those stories meant so much during this time. I started actually writing them down and sharing them. And so it ended up being a journey of self-discovery for me. And my parents came to this country with nothing, with no money. They fled their homeland in China, and they worked hard to give me a life filled with opportunity. I will never take that for granted again. And I'm grateful that they have given me the best of both worlds.
In your album, Silver Linings.
Yes.
Your album, Silver Linings, speaks to that.
Yes.
Is that where you got that? What silver lining have you found through this experience?
There have been so many silver linings, and I think each one of you is part of that, because it's about human connection. And although I was isolating myself physically from the world, as we all were, this thing with modern technology allowed me to connect with people from all over the world, all walks of life that I would never have imagined. I mean, the piece I mentioned, Space Between the Fish and the Moon, the composer, the Cambodian composer, Chinnery Aung, he lives in California. And because of this, the music brought us together. And he is not only a close friend, but a mentor to me. And doing all the virtual concerts that I must have done 40 over the past year. I believe that many people who, prior to the pandemic, who may not have had the time or the inclination or the finances to go to a classical music concert, just with a click on the mouse, they were able to join us. And I think that this was incredible because, we were able to reach a far greater audience than ever before. And now that we're coming back to in-person slowly, I hope that many of those people will want to come, So those were some of the beautiful silver linings that I embrace from this experience.
The parish has the same experience in that we've had the same thing go on here just within our services and the ability to live stream.
Right.
And in fact, right now we have over 300 people watching us. But throughout the experience, we were hoping that we'd be able to introduce our faith to others in the same way as you're saying, and now introduce them and welcome them into the doors as well, now that we're open. So quite a similarity. One of the things you spoke about is the Korean organization that helps all groups.
Right.
Here at Sacred Heart St. Stephen's, our motto is always, I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. And there's a universality about that. The word Catholic means universal. What do you think we, as children of the same God, can do for our Asian brothers and sisters at this time, those of us who are not Asian American?
Well, I think you're doing it today. I'm very grateful to be here, and it's not even the month of May. Our the Asian American community's designated month of celebration, which I'm grateful for, but I do believe that the conversation should always continue. So things like this mean a lot. You know, I think allyship means more now than ever before. Racism is not new, let's face it. If it's against the Jews, the Asian community, you know, African American, we have learned that history repeats itself. And that has to stop. Change has to be made in order for history to stop repeating itself. And I have hope. I do feel, at least with our Asian community, that there is some change, because in the past, you know, I grew up in a very Asian, traditional Asian family where when things happened that were not good, if there was bullying, I was told, don't cause any trouble. Don't, you know, bring any attention to yourself. Just grin and bear it, and this will pass. I guess that was self-preservation in a way, but that isn't the answer. And today, you know, I see the young people especially becoming more vocal. I attribute that also to social media and technology. But I do believe that we, all of us, have to lift each other up. We have to have our voices heard and stand by each other. And that's the only way that change can be made, and we can embrace a kinder and more beautiful world.
And is that then for us, or for you, would be the universal message? You spoke about the fact that all different groups throughout history have experienced bias, bigotry, hatred. What is the universal message, you think, in this particular moment in time?
Well, you know, that we are all in this together, but I'd also like to share something that my mother told me in 1973, when the doors first opened to China. And, excuse me. We were arriving in Shanghai, and she was getting ready to see her parents for the first time in over 30 years. And she held my hand tightly, and she whispered, "Never give up hope, and always look for your silver linings."
That's beautiful.
I'm so sorry, this is just a very emotional.
It's okay. Many of us here are Italian, we're very emotional people. And those who aren't have been around long enough in Carroll Gardens, we're all emotional at this point. Finally, speaking to that fact that this historic place has always been a welcoming home for immigrants, particularly the Italian Americans, given our geographic location. Tell us about your experience as a first-generation Italian American. What you alluded to it a little bit, but you know, many of us have stories of our families or our immigrants ourselves who are here. As an Asian American, what brought your family, what brought your parents or your dad you spoke about here? What would make your mom leave for 30 years without seeing her mother?
Yeah.
If you could just talk to us about that, because I think that's something that many of us can find commonality in within our own families, our own histories, no matter where we come from.
Well, you know, I do think that we all have our family stories that are so important, so moving, so strong. And the immigrant experience is what makes this country so strong. It really is. It's the creativity, it's the resilience of our families that before us. So I just want to share one of my favorite, most treasured childhood memories. I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens. And it was a beautiful summer evening. I was around 11 or 12 years old. 6 p.m., my mom was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She was a fabulous cook. the most amazing Chinese food. And I was practicing piano, and I had just learned my first Chopin waltz, the waltz in C sharp minor, and I was playing it, and my dad comes home from work, and I wanted to greet him, but this time he told me, no, keep playing. And he stood there for a moment, listening. And then he ran into the kitchen, and the next thing I know it, my parents come out of the kitchen and they're dancing, and they're waltzing and twirling around the living room to my music, and there was so much joy, so much love. I didn't want that moment to end, but the music ended, and my dad turned to me. He was smiling with tears in his eyes, and he told me his story that in the 1940s, when the Japanese occupied China, all the schools, the Chinese schools were shut down, and the Japanese schools were put in its place. So my father opened underground schools for the Chinese children to teach them the Chinese language, history, and culture. And that was going very well until it was discovered. And his school was shut down, and he was imprisoned. But as luck would have it, one of the guards, a Japanese guard, was married to a Chinese woman, and they had a son who was my father's student. So in the middle of the night, the guard came in and set him free, but with a warning. He said, "You must leave China and never come back." And that's what my father did. He left his family, his friends, all his worldly belongings, which weren't much. He came from a very poor family. And he came to this country penniless, with nothing but his hopes and dreams. And he came here, his English wasn't good, he got a job that he hated, it was horrible, long hours, little pay. He had a little hole-in-the-wall room to live in, to come home at night and sleep. He had one meal a day, peanut butter and rice. And soon he became very depressed. But he wouldn't give up. And after several weeks of saving his pennies, he bought himself a precious gift, a radio. And when he had that radio, every night he would come home, eat his peanut butter and rice, and enter a world of glorious music. And he told me that one of the first pieces of music he heard that saved him was my Chopin waltz. And he said the miracle was coming home, hearing his daughter playing that piece from all those years ago, because at that moment, he knew that his hopes and dreams had come true. And if I can get calm enough, I would love to share that waltz with you today.
We've heard many things to give us pause, to give us thoughts. And we must take home with ourselves the universal that prejudice, hatred, violence against any person because of race, color, creed, sexual orientation is not in keeping with the mind of Christ or God. We must hold on to that because all of us are created in this divine image and all of us are in the dance of life, where partners change and come and move, and all of us can enjoy each other. Thank you very much for this day. Thank you for coming, and thank you for those who have planned this.